Welcome back to the MMA Prospectus Head Cold Edition. I am Zane Simon of Bloody Elbow, joined by my co-hosts Tom Grant. We are here to talk UFC 193, maybe reflect a little on Sao Paulo card last week, and talk a little Bama and legacy. I'm a little sick, so if I have to mute myself and blow my nose and look weird throughout the show, then so be it. I'll ask Tom to carry a lot of the discussion since he's not sick, and why not? I got to stop doing all the work around here at some point.
If you want me to carry the discussion, we're pretty much screwed.
All right. On that note, jumping right into it, we're going to look at UFC 193 first and foremost to start things off this week, just because, I hate to say this because anybody who's tuning into this show, which is all of none of you at the moment, but hopefully is a few of you throughout the week, is probably going to roll their eyes and think I'm horrible and a sellout. But it's a Ronda week, and on a Ronda week, we're going to lead the show with a little discussion of UFC 193, her fight card, the young talent on it, which strangely enough still includes Ronda Rousey.
So, Zane, can I just start? How much is the UFC paying you to make Ronda a star?
Oh, you know what? It's all Reebok gear.
Oh, yeah. Really? They're sending you Reebok gear? I got to be honest, I'm getting money under the table.
Oh, that's terrible.
They grandfathered me in from pre-Reebok deal, so.
Okay, well
yeah.
that makes sense. Yeah,
people figured out a long time ago that no one's actually interested in Ronda. It's all just a great big conspiracy.
Absolutely, yeah. For me, it's all I get is I get the Giblert shirts.
Well, those are collector's items. You got to hold on to those.
Yeah, I think of it as my own version of stock options.
They'll you know what, that's probably long term. You're probably better off.
Exactly. So I'm getting signature Giblert shirts, maybe a few. What was it?
Jacare Ronaldo Souza.
Yeah, Jacare Ronaldo Souza and Marcio Lioto.
Yeah. Oh.
Machida shirts. Just a few things, a few of those kicking around. And for all that, get to show how much of a star get to tell, make Ronda Rousey a star, push her down the throats of all of you terrible, long-suffering MMA fans. On that note, Holly Holm, Ronda Rousey, it is really weird to me to have to say this, but not only is Ronda Rousey still pretty young in her MMA career, having started in 2011, but she's actually only been fighting for 1 month, even actually 25 days longer in MMA than Holly Holm.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said that with all of the Ronda's rise to fame and kind of the reaction within MMA fans to kind of dump on the division and just talk about how weak women's bantamweight is, which has always been weird to me that's a discussion, because I distinctly remember the days when women's bantamweight was the strongest women's division. And now that's certainly not the case. I think women's strawweight is a really deep division, but I'm not ready to just completely write off the entire 135 division as just being terrible because Ronda's running through them. Her adaptation to MMA has been incredible. She took an art that a lot of people really didn't think as being super applicable within MMA and judo, and has adapted it into a high level mixed martial arts game pretty quickly. And for as bad as her boxing looks and all that, she has completely dismantled some really good female grapplers in her career already. So to me, it's one of those things that just the way she integrated that Olympic style judo with just a touch of really nasty meanness to MMA has been really impressive.
Yeah, it's strange to think too that the greatest point of comparison to Ronda Rousey in MMA may honestly be Brock Lesnar.
Yeah.
In that, like, especially as somebody who may end up retiring before they ever actually get into what would be considered the prime of their career. Like, Brock Lesnar came in 2007 and was gone by 2011, and obviously he had diverticulitis that really stalled him out at the end there. But Ronda Rousey, getting started in 2011 and it's 2015, and we're already starting to think about her being done and
Yeah.
like just not needing this sport anymore. And that's the only good comparison there really is out there of another fighter who can rise to fame and dominance so quickly and then leave because they just don't need it.
Yeah, I think that's pretty apt, and it's looking that way. She always says that she thinks about this sport in like Olympic cycles, like 4 year cycles, and in 2016, I think is going to be decision time for her because I think it's pretty apparent that while a lot of people kind of assume like people forget how quickly she became a star and how much that seems to be impacting her. She's constantly talking about how busy she is and how crazy everything is. I kind of get the impression that she would very much be okay with kind of backing away from a lot of it and kind of slowing her life back down a little bit.
Or even just focusing on one aspect of fame. I mean,
Yeah.
she's got all these movie projects coming up. If she just does that for a while, she can, she can ride her MMA fame for quite a while just doing that. And then if it starts to wane, come back and take another fight with whoever the contender is.
Mm-hmm.
So, on that note, her current contender, Holly Holm, we should also talk about. Like I say, Holly Holm's been fighting. She's pretty much keeping pace with Ronda Rousey as far as her pro MMA career is gone.
Mm-hmm.
A couple less fights, but just about as much time spent in the sport. And it really goes to show, like, it's a great look at exactly what two very good athletes side by side, the difference between being, like, really amazingly elite and just being a very, very good athlete is. Like, that dividing line between elite and being very good is Holly Holm and Ronda Rousey side by side in terms of dominance.
Yeah. And to me too, Holly Holm's career is fairly impressive in the sense that how often do we see someone coming from a professional boxing and professional striking background transitioning this smoothly to MMA? Now she's reworked her game a bit to make it work in the cage. She's had struggles adapting to the clinch fighting of MMA at times, but I mean, you don't see a lot of professional, high level professional strikers make a smooth transition to MMA ever. And it's not just because of the money. We've seen many kickboxers try to make the transition and pretty much fail quite badly. And I think if it wasn't for, I mean, Joanna Jedrzejczyk is like the great exception of how quickly she took to MMA. And I think Holly Holm is on much more of a regular adaptation curve. And I think coming in from striking, it's a highly applicable skill for MMA. I'd argue that at the highest levels, it's now the more important skill. It's what differentiates elite fighters most of the time. But it also, I feel, takes a long time to make it work in the cage. And we've talked about this because you need to fill in that base level of grappling, and there needs to be. She has it at the point where it's good enough to stop a lot of fighters, but it's not like at that level where like she can impose her game on the feet without really having to worry about the grappling. I feel like she strikes still concerned about getting clinched too often or getting taken down too often.
Yeah, and that, I mean, that's why when a lot of people have said, like, oh, I think Holly's as good as she's going to get in MMA, like, I really don't think that's the case. Now, it could be that she wants to retire soon and do something else because she's been fighting forever and she wants to go start a family or whatever else she might want to do. And, because that's what I've heard from the very, very moment she got signed to the UFC, where people were like, well, they might want to rush her just because she may not want to be in this for the long haul. She's had a long combat sports career. But if they don't, if she does stick around, I do expect Holly Holm to get better over the next 2 or 3 years as her increasing comfort with pressure fighters and pressure grapplers and wrestlers improves.
Yeah, that it's one of those things that I kind of don't really think of her much as a prospect anymore, but that's mostly because I don't see the giant leaps in her game. It's mostly she's refining her game, and I think
Yeah.
that's still I think there still could be a big jump point in which she is confident enough in her grappling and confident enough in her ability to get off the cage or get out of those bad spots that she starts letting it go, and we see a more effective Holly Holm in the cage. But right now, I mean, she's getting. I mean, we're still in the same year that Raquel Pennington was like really easily able to close the distance on her and pin her to the cage on multiple occasions. So I think this is really fast for Holly Holm, and I know that a lot of people are throwing out theories that it's going to be maybe a drawn out fight for Ronda, and I think maybe it's drawn out for a round, but I don't think it takes Ronda long to close the gap on her, and I don't think Holmes has the clinch skills or the ground skills to really fight off Ronda for very long.
Yeah, I have I have the I don't know. Like I have to see it to believe it for personally for somebody taking Ronda like really taking Ronda for a hard fight or taking her for more than a round even just like making the fight last longer. I'm going to see it to believe it stage. We saw Misha Tate do it and she's already fought Ronda before so she really knew what to expect and she was able to really like escape a lot of the submission attempts and things like that. But with Holm, I I need to see her actually be able to stay away from Rousey and stay on the outside and try and like pick at her to believe that she's not going to get thrown the first time she gets clinched up and end up on her back tapping to an armbar.
Yeah.
Anyway, the other promising young prospect I want to talk about atop this card, not Mark Hunt, although I don't know if you've seen his latest training videos, he does look like he's in the best shape of his career, is Joanna Jedrzejczyk, who is about as singularly and immediately successful as anyone has been in the history of MMA. Like,
Yeah, I'm gonna go on a limb and say this Johanna kid could be something special in like a year or two. I mean,
yeah,
she's still developing. Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
she's had the kind of heavyweight success that you generally only see, or she had the kind of success at strawweight that you generally only see out of heavyweight fighters, where they can
Yeah.
come out and like 2 or 3 years in be championship ready. Like, and we're talking old school heavyweights like Josh Barnett era.
hmm and
And
part of it,
oh,
a
sorry.
big part of it is just how quickly. And I don't know. I mean, one of those things is that the strawweight division is very good. I feel like it's getting it got a big influx of like newer talent than women's bantamweight did. I feel like a lot of newer talent came into the division. I mean, Claudia Gadelia got into the game at like the end of 2000, the second half of 2008. When was Carla Esparza? She's been fighting longer than you would think, but hasn't been around that terribly long.
As far as it got started in 2010.
Yeah, so she's been around. So it's still it's a division that's full of exciting young talent. And Jędrzejczyk came in with a deep technical skill base and adapted it so well to MMA to the point where no one can hang with her right now. It seems like except maybe Claudia Gadelia.
Yeah, and Gadelia is I think she's the premier athlete of the division, which is what has made her that highly competitive. But it's a big question to me whether like the second time around we see and because relative to growth, I think we're, we should have already kind of started to see Gadelia hitting her prime. Like these should be her like complete game, and she looks like she's there. She looks
Mm-hmm.
like a very complete, polished fighter now. But I feel like Jedrzejczyk has a lot of adjusting that she can do, a lot more adjusting she can do for Gadelia a second time around.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of those things that, and I've had this discussion with you that in the Gadelia fight, and even the Esparza fight, Johanna's got really good like center of the cage wrestling, but against the fence in those two fights, when she got to the fence, they took her down. And in the Penne fight, we saw a big step up in that. Now, Penne is not exactly an amazing wrestler. She stuck Jedrzejczyk to the fence for like not very long periods of time. Johanna was able to get off her, and just beat the shit out of her. Uh, I think my actual notes on this fight, just pulling it up, I think my exact quote is just beat the ever loving fuck out of Penne.
Yeah, it was delightful.
She's a really strong wrestler, and she's getting better at it. And while she's not the most powerful single strike person out, like girl in the division, man, she puts just vicious volume on people, and just man, she messes them up. It's a lot of fun to watch her work. I think she has the potential to be one of those long reigning champions on the level of like a Ronda Rousey or something like that.
Yeah, the interesting thing for me too is with Letourneau. It's hard to tell exactly where Letourneau is in terms of her career because, I mean, she's never fought very consistently before her UFC career. Frankly, like she fought a few times in 2007, then once in 2009, once in 20 or twice in 2011 and 12, and then not until 2014. So it's hard to know whether, I think moving to ATT, we should expect, and we've seen her improve a lot since then, since getting with a big, or getting with that camp and things like that. But, you know, it is weird in this position where, like, Jedrzejczyk as the champ is one of the fighters that I expect to see the most fight to fight improvement out of in that division.
Yep.
Like, she's been fighting for a lot less time than most of her contemporaries in the top 15.
Yeah, and as we said earlier with Holly Holm, it still holds true that I still think that Johanna's got a lot of her game that she can still import. She's a big time kicker,
Yep.
and really the last fight is the first time we really saw her kicks in MMA. And that's probably because for a long period of time she was afraid to throw them because of getting taken down. And I think as her wrestling has improved, she is going to start fearing that less and less. And especially against Letourneau, who I forget who said it. Somebody I heard mention the idea that the Letourneau match for Jedrzejczyk is very similar to the way Rousey had Liz Carmouche in her first main event with the UFC. It's someone who's a credible fighter and a credible athlete, but whose game plays exactly into Jedrzejczyk's game.
Yeah.
And so I think this is going to be this is something of a showcase performance for Jedrzejczyk, and I hopefully will get to see her against Claudia Gadelha either early in 2016.
Yeah, that we'll definitely see that fight again. It's strange to think that she is going to probably keep pace and potentially outpace everyone in her division at the moment. Like there's nobody in there that's like, "Oh, this is the person who's going to rise up and take the crown from her," because she's just like she's at the same place as all of them. Like even somebody like Rose Namajunas or Paige Van Zant.
Yeah.
Maybe they started a year later than her. That's not really relevant in the scheme of an MMA career.
Yeah.
5 years, 6 years in, those or 4 or 5 years in, those fighters that start coming up and just starting then, those are the guys where it's like, oh yeah, this could be somebody that really we expect to see them make leaps and become like the champion. But at the moment, like everybody there is just developing right along with her. So they are going to have to make massive leaps to catch up. Uh, Otherwise, looking at the main card of this event, there are a couple guys where I feel like we're just about done talking about them. Perhaps Rosholt less than Whitaker. But Whitaker, this is kind of like the last time I'm really thinking of talking about Whitaker as a prospect. He's about at the point where we should be seeing him as a very complete fighter entering his prime.
Yeah, I think he's very much he's entering into his potential. Like,
Yeah.
and he doesn't look like a fantastic athlete. Like, he doesn't look like the action figure athlete that we kind of picture, but he's a sneaky good athlete and is a like deeply technical striker at this point. I think he's on the verge, and I think Pat Wyman, talking to him or reading one of his things, said that he feels that Whitaker's like on the verge of becoming a pretty special striker within his division. So I think the match against Uriah Hall is a really savvy one to like push him to kind of step into that special striker zone.
Yeah.
And really excellent hooks, or I should say left hook. His left hook is fire, and a pretty excellent wrestler also, which is pretty surprising. Just considering, like, I seem to remember early in his career, his wrestling looking a little suspect at time, but I think he's really shored it up. Overall, he's a guy that I would agree that I think he's crossing out of this fight will be his entrance into kind of the world of potential contenders. And I look forward to it just because I think it's an excellent piece of matchmaking.
Yeah. Even though he's only, I think, 24, because he started his career so young, he's basically at the point, and hopefully that too means that he will have a longer career because he started so young, and he'll be able to fight at a high level up until he's hits 30 or so. But he's getting to the point where once guys hit this 6, 5 to 7, somewhere in there, depending on the fighter, and I think he's very much there. Like, I want to see them in the toughest fight they can get every single time out.
Yeah.
It's like once you've hit your prime, once you've had a certain amount of experience and development, what I as a fan want is, like, I no longer want to see even fighters I like. I no longer want to see them carried at all.
Yeah. Well, I think in that sense that this is a good fight then.
Yeah.
I mean, Uriah Hall, not an easy fight in any sense. Like,
yeah.
And we've talked about this too. Uriah Hall is really tough dude.
Yeah, he is super. Like, that's one of the most underrated things about him is that people are like, oh well, he doesn't have a fighter's mentality and all that, and it's that kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, but he's tough as shit. Like, he's not gonna go away because you hurt him or because you hit him.
Yeah, it's one of those that if Robert Whitaker outstrikes Uriah Hall, that will be a big thing for him. I don't think he finishes Uriah Hall. If he finishes Uriah Hall, that's really impressive. I mean, the only guy that has finished Uriah Hall is Chris Weidman.
Yeah,
it's the only dude that's done it.
I expect Robert Whitaker to be able to outwork Hall.
Yeah,
but if he finished him, that would be huge.
Whitaker's one of the big pluses of his style is he is a high output guy. He's a high volume guy, and Uriah Hall is not. So that speaks to Whitaker's favor.
So, and the other guy I want to talk about on the main card here is Jared Rosholt, who a lot of people are picking to lose to Stefan Struve.
Yeah, I can see that.
And I'm still pretty sold on Rosholt as that guy who is going to be like top. I don't want to say quite top 5, but like near the top, borderline top 5 at heavyweight, just because he wrestles in a division where nobody wrestles.
Yeah. Well, I think for Rosholt, the guy, his game I would term as just pure grinder.
Yeah.
Like he wants to press you into the fence and drag you to the mat and make you really tired. He can hit pretty hard, but he'll brawl.
Yep.
Not really a technical striker by any sense, but he hits hard and he's got a really good uppercut, like in close. My immediate reaction was like people were picking Struve, and then it came back to me that if there's one thing that Struve is actually legitimately good at, it's submission grappling.
Yeah.
And he never does it by choice. He pretty much always makes the other guy initiate grappling.
Yeah.
I think Rosholt's going to initiate the grappling, so I could see Struve finding a submission because he's actually one of the more savvy mat grapplers in the division. And Jared Rosholt not gonna get Stefan Struve out of there, I don't think.
No, probably not. But I just think that Struve is a great grappler in a division where very few guys have a great ride game.
Yeah.
Like, very few heavyweights have a great ability to top ride.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't. And Rosholt is one of the only guys that does. And, like, that ability to get takedowns and actually control and ride is... I think that can carry him way past the point that it should in most divisions.
Yeah, I think that's entire. I favor Rosholt in this, but I won't be shocked if he ends up in Struve's guard.
It's heavyweight. You should never be shocked if a heavyweight loses.
This is my sneaky pick for like one of the few triangles we see like every year. Just because Rosholt seems like the kind of dude, like he's got those huge shoulders that like probably never gets triangled in the gym because no one can actually lock him up. And then there's like 4 guys in the world that have the legs to actually triangle him, and Struve's actually one of them.
Yeah, it could happen. I could see it. I
more likely Rosholt puts him in the turtle and just beats him up for 2 rounds.
Yeah.
And then he gets really tired.
Rosholt's got a pretty good gas tank, and Struve has never exactly had a great one. So otherwise the shining prospect on this card, outside of all the already known and pretty famous fighters we've talked about, the guy that's really rising here is Jake Matthews. And even off a loss to James Vick, I think this is going to be a great showcase for him.
Yeah, it's a really I'm really excited for it just because I thought he had a pretty good showing in the Vick fight. Vick's a really tough matchup. Vick's a big is a big long dude who really understands how to win his fights, and it's kind of hard to fault the guy for especially early in his career dropping a decision like that. Oh no, he got guillotine choked, didn't he?
Yeah, he got guillotined.
Oh, I was thinking completely the wrong fight. Was this the one where he dove in on it? Or was it early?
Yeah, it was pretty early. He just couldn't. He didn't trust himself to sit outside and try to outbox Vick, and so he kept rushing into the clinch. And I think Vick just kind of hopped up onto him and onto a guillotine because Vick's so much taller.
Yeah, and again, like there's a few things that Vick's a pretty solid grappler, and of the few things that he does very well, guillotines is one of them.
Yeah.
So, but Matthews, sorry, we're talking about Matthews. We're not talking about Vick. No. Let's see. I think we're starting with Matthews. You got to talk about the fact that athletically he is pretty special. Really good athlete. And on the feet, he's still kind of basic, but it's the basics that work. And I think we're gonna get to another fighter who, on this card, very credentialed on the feet, but doesn't play any basics. I prefer like a Matthews like game where it's a couple kicks, a jab, cross, but you know what? He's pretty good at them, and he gets in and he works his way inside. And that's where he wants to be. He understands where his game is and how to get there. On the mat, incredibly fun, aggressive submission guy. Good takedowns. Really, in addition to like the classic wrestling shots, has like good trips from the clinch. So overall, I'd probably agree. Like outside of, I think he's probably the guy the prospect I'm most excited to watch on this card.
Yeah, I mean, I think Matthews is a pretty excellent prospect. He's got top 10 athleticism.
Mm-hmm.
And that's that's always the big place to start with any prospect when you're looking at like, can they make it? Can they be a great fighter down the road? So what kind of athlete are they? And then he's got a good wrestling, good grappling base to go on. And it's my only real concern is that he's training, kind of out in the middle of nowhere, Australia, and that is not going to serve him well over the long run.
No, that's a problem. But it is something that can be fixed. I mean, at this point, if he's moving up in his career, a lot of fighters. It seems like fighters are more and more fighters are understanding the idea that you need to get yourself in to a place where at the very least you have elite training partners.
Yeah, and I mean, fortunately for him, as we've seen with Mark Hunt now, like Mark Hunt has spent his camp at AKA Thailand, and fortunately for them, like AKA Thailand does seem like a good US style camp on that part of the globe. Because and unfortunately, like when I say that Matthews is training out in the middle of nowhere, he lives. Well, I don't know exactly where he lives. I think it says Epping, Victoria, Australia. I have no idea whether that's nowhere or not. But Australia in general, in MMA terms, is the middle of nowhere. Like,
it's starting to produce some excellent, like intriguing young fighters, and you do get that. There's that like South Pacific kind of exchange going on where you get like judo in Australia and Muay Thai from Thailand kind of converging into this this subset of the Australian style of MMA. But yeah, there's not really like an elite camp in that area that you would like want to send an up and coming prospect to.
yeah. So it does. That's my big worry for him over the long run is if he can't ever get really good high level camps and coaching, he could end up in sort of a Jordan Meehan position as like a guy who has some flashy fights and some great potential and is a great athlete. And we keep seeing him. We're like, oh, if he can just put it all together, he's going to be fantastic. And then is out of the sport in his mid-20s,
Yeah,
just,
not having been able to make any money and
yeah, it just never clicks because he, maybe never quite got the good enough training or got pushed too hard too early. We'll see. Matthews is only 21, but that also means that he started fighting as a pro when he was like 18. So
yeah, I mean he was on the Ultimate Fighter when he was 19.
yep.
I mean that's he's already been in the game for a little bit.
It'll be interesting to see how far that takes him.
Mm-hmm.
The other like premier, well, there are two other guys worth talking about. If I'm pretty much only one. Okay, the only other guy really worth talking about much is James Muntasri.
I thought you were going a different direction with that. I'm going to be honest.
Oh, where did you think I was going?
I thought you were going Benoit.
Benoit's basically kind of weirdly in the Robert Whitaker zone, where he started his career back in 2009 and has been fighting pretty consistently ever since.
That's true.
He's comes out of this Janjira Muay Thai camp, which I've seen some other guys out of there who I'm failing to remember who right now. But I think he's just kind of.
Oh, David Rickles out of there.
Yeah. David Rickles came out of there too, and they've got this aggressive power Muay Thai style, and that's kind of who Benoit is.
Yeah, that's true.
He might jump and make power strikers tend to improve for longer and later than other fighters, but I don't necessarily think that we're going to be seeing major changes out of Benoit. The best we might see is that everything's just going to kind of click for him at one point, and we don't know when. It could just be in a year or two, suddenly everything's just going to start working in a way that it's never quite happened before. But I don't know that I would really count him as a complete, as really a prospect at this point.
I mean, if nothing else, I think Benoit's got the physical tools to
Yes.
do something. I do agree with your assessment. His striking, while powerful, I don't love. I'm not really a big fan of his footwork. He extends and reaches on a lot of his strikes. He doesn't move and strike very well. He kind of needs to plant his feet. He's got a vicious left hook, and I believe that's what he sent Sergio Pettis into orbit with when they fought. But man, is that dude willing to take a punch? It's not like take one to give one. He like takes three to give one. And despite being a wrestler, his offensive wrestling transitions are good, but his defensive wrestling is not that great. And on the mat, he's average on top, below average on bottom, and is very predicated on being like an explosion grappler. So I think there's definitely room for improvement. I think there's the athletic ability to improve. It's just a matter of whether that improvement will come.
Yeah, and I might pick when to beat him, frankly, just because Benoit seems to get very tracked into like one mode of offense, whereas Wynn is very much none of his skills are complete, but he's dangerous everywhere and very willing to mix it up.
Yeah.
Anyway, talking about Muntasiri, he's kind of the other prospect on this card who's very much in that like very athletic, has the potential to be a top 10 athlete, but his game is just very fractured.
At this point, all right, so all the talk is about his international Taekwondo experience, right? I mean, silver medalist in the Pan Am's, really good Taekwondo guy. So you expect him to be this amazing high fly kicker. But I think the highlight of his games thus far in his career is his cage clinch grappling, because that's where he always is, because he really doesn't control distance on the feet. At all. Like he wants to be on the outside striking, but he only ever gets off like one or two strikes before he either runs smack into the guy because they don't give ground the way he's kind of expecting they will, or they charge in on him and close that distance because they don't want a Taekwondo guy getting the full spin cycle going in front of them. So he ends up, he's got a really good defensive wrestling game against the cage. He's got a really good clinch game against the cage. He can kick really hard, but he has like a total lack of an outside game right now, mostly because he hasn't built an outside game for MMA.
Well, I think one of the big reasons that we could say that he's probably a better clinch fighter than anything else is because he is so strong and such a great athlete that's the area where he's most able to consistently put that athleticism to use.
Mm-hmm.
So it's when he's got his hands on the guy and he's able to push him around, that's when he can, the fact that he's stronger and faster and more explosive and dynamic that's where he's able to use all that consistently, because when he's at range, he can't maintain it.
Mm-hmm.
So he's still a fighter that's developing, still has time to improve, but it'll be interesting to see how much he improves, because I really don't have a good grasp on how well Blackhouse develops fighters.
It's tough. I mean, like who would be their like the superstar that they developed? Who would be their quintessential? I mean, are we counting Jacare, or is he more of an X-Gym guy?
That's the thing. I don't really know what the makeup of the camp is.
Yeah, because I mean, like Lyoto, but he was with the Nogueira brothers.
And he, early in his career, it was all sort of his own thing.
Yeah, and then it was his own thing for a while when he was like training in the jungle under waterfalls for the Shogun rematch.
So I don't really know what the identity of Blackhouse is in terms of like who is head coach there, like who's who's really like polishing athletes. I think I've, if I'm remembering, I may be misremembering, I've heard that it's kind of like a scenario where it's really more of a high-level guys sparring with each other training place than it is a here you'll get definite instruction kind of camp.
That's the impression I've always had. I've had it's more of a gym where like a lot of elite guys come to spar with each other, and everyone kind of has their own coaches and their own home gym that they kind of hang out at.
Yeah.
And it's more of like, hey, like twice a week we get together at Black House and we spar with like a bunch of good guys.
Which then, leaves you to wonder how much a guy like Muntasri is really just dependent on whoever's in the gym that day and is, being a sparring partner for other high-level athletes.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. But I do think he's got a good fight in front of him to win. I expect him to look good against his opponent, but Muntasri may be destined to just be like an interesting experiment that never quite comes to fruition.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting to watch a guy try to adapt something like Taekwondo to the cage, and his game strikes me like what we were just talking about. His game seems very much like a kind of like a survival game that is developed by like sparring with a lot of high level dudes, but maybe never having like I can't say this, but with any certainty because I don't know what his coaching situation is, but how often is he getting like a specific training just for him to build his offensive striking game inside the cage?
Yeah, it does. It doesn't seem like I keep, for the past couple fights of his, I keep waiting to see that, that big improvement where it's like, oh man, you can really tell he's been putting all the pieces together, and I don't see it. I just haven't seen that yet. It could happen, but until it does, it's just going to he's going to be a very matchup dependent talent. So let's move back to last week real quick.
All right.
Before we look at some of the other regional fights. And
Thomas Almeida killed a man.
Yeah, Thomas Almeida killed him, man. That's the very first thing is really that was Thomas Almeida's time to shine because I think Burchak is the best win of his career and he looked better than he ever has.
I think for very good reasons, people were predicting that Burchak was going to give Thomas Almeida some trouble, and Thomas Almeida just didn't have any of it. Just like, no, you're going to go away.
And the big thing is that, for all the talk we've had about how hittable Almeida is, he actually got hit more times by Burchak than he hit Burchak. But Burchak, he made Burchak miss a lot in that fight. Like, Burchak landed at 29% of his strikes. He threw almost 100 strikes in less than a round and only landed 27 of them.
Mm-hmm.
So Almeida, I would say not only is it one of Almeida's better offensive performances, but it shows what we should really, what I think has been a little overlooked in how hittable he is, that he's going to continue improving a lot. This is a guy whose career started in 2012.
Yeah.
He took his first fight at the end of 2011 and has been fighting only. So we have 2012, 13, 14, and now 15. That's 3.5 years, or coming up on his 4th year of pro fighting.
Mm-hmm.
And we should continue to see leaps and bounds of improvement for another 2 or 3 years.
I would agree with that.
And so this really, this suggests to me that he's on an accelerated pace to be title contention ready and not too distant a future.
Mm-hmm. I think he looks like he's on track to be more than the high level gatekeeper than I originally thought he was going to be. I mean, it was a really excellent performance, and I feel like this card in general was like the the card of the striker, specifically not counting Almeida, like the counter outside striker, because both Jimmy Rivera and Rashid Magomedov just messed dudes up on the outside this fight card.
Yeah. Speaking of that too, and Teixeira.
Oh yeah, and Teixeira.
Almeida was like the shining great prospect who really even outperformed expectations. So we had to have a couple of guys who underperformed expectations. Mm-hmm. Gilbert Burns, Patrick Cummins. Full credit to them. They were both decided underdogs, and they were faced with losing situations from the get-go. Like I'm not lower on either fighter for losing the fights that they did.
I mean, Gilbert Burns was doing everything he could to get Magomedov down, and just nothing was working. There were a couple times that Burns got like full body locks and just was not able to do a damn thing with it. Magomedov is a pretty special guy, and very much like the new breed of, like, I don't want to say sprawl and brawler because it just like pains me to use that, but I mean just like a new he's very much Magomedov's established him very much as like the vanguard of the new MMA striker meta game, like the perfect rendition of it.
Yeah.
Minus the fact that he just doesn't seem to care when people get hurt. He's just like, no, okay.
Yeah, he's not quite willing to pull the trigger enough, but it is very much like, and the weirdest thing about it is that like one of the fighters really pushing that meta game as like more heavily than a lot of others is Robbie Lawler. Like, it's like a super weird idea because Lawler's been around forever and ever and ever. But he's the guy that really has that, like, he and he gets taken down, but he's very able to pop back up. And
oh yeah, I mean, he's the way Robbie Lawler just like laughed off Rory McDonald's like takedowns and attempts to grapple him and just like stood back up is still like one of the more impressive and badass things I've seen in the cage. It's just like, oh, this is adorable, kid. You want to grapple with me?
Yeah, and so I mean, Magomedov really, he is a shining example of that same kind of metagame. He's not the punishing fighter that Lawler is, and Oregon Jacek, who is very much on that same wavelength. But it's that idea of like really finely honed takedown defense and really technical striking to go with it. The kind of striking that does not constantly leave you open to be taken down.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't fault Burns for losing that fight.
Nope, just lost to a better fighter.
Yep. And for Cummins, like, unfortunately, I want to talk about this with Corey Anderson too, because Corey Anderson's probably going to end up in very much the exact same place as Cummins. It's a lot easier to become a top 10 ranked light heavyweight than it is to be booked as a top 10 ranked light heavyweight.
Yeah. Now, I've never been super sold on Patrick Cummins. So I seem to remember feeling pretty strongly in the last show that Teixeira was going to clean his clock. So I wasn't overly surprised when Teixeira cleaned his clock. But I think Corey Anderson has a bit more. I see him as a bit more potential than Patrick Cummins. But I don't know. I mean, like, I just never really understood like where the excitement for Patrick Cummins came from. But
I mean, the thing with Cummins is that he not only was he a very good wrestler, but he has a very dynamic takedown game.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's a good athlete. Really very solidly a top 10 UFC athlete. and he's got this smooth, dynamic takedown game that he blasted Teixeira off his feet whenever he could actually get in for a takedown. He did not have any trouble planting Teixeira on his back.
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't have a great top ride because he wants to be an aggressive striker. He wants to have really aggressive ground and pound, so he's not very controlling from top position.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not intensely durable. And he really has trouble taking a punch. He's not durable in a way that Anderson is durable.
Yep.
And has failed to jump on striking in a way that Anderson seems to have really taken to being a striker.
Mm-hmm.
But I see Anderson, like, this win for Corey Anderson pushes him up into top 10 territory. And once you become a top 10 light heavyweight, the UFC will book you like a top 10 light heavyweight. And that means that, Anderson's next fight could be against somebody like Rashad Evans or Glover Teixeira or, even just like Gustafsson on a bad day that they need somebody to fight Gustafsson, or OSP or Ryan Bader. And any of those guys could really easily beat Corey Anderson very badly right now.
Yeah, they would ruin his day, month, most likely. What am I trying? It's not like the light heavyweight is not a zero depth pool. There's not a gradual like getting into the deep end. It is a sharp decline. You go from the 3-foot area to like the 12 feet deep, and there's no warning rope. You cross that line, and you better be able to swim.
Yeah, and what I think the big thing for fans then is, like, for us as analysts and for fans and everybody else, is to understand that you can't peg your expectations of the fighter based on their win or loss in a fight.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Cummins getting demolished by Glover Teixeira, what the hell is he supposed to do in that fight? Like, the dude has been fighting consistently for 3 years.
Yeah.
How much do we expect him to compete with Glover Teixeira?
Glover Teixeira, a dude who gave John Jones his wrestling problems,
Like, it's and for so next time out, Corey Anderson gets booked against Ryan Bader or somebody like OSP. Let's say he gets booked against OSP next time out, and he just gets absolutely knocked silly because OSP is an amazing athlete and is in his prime right now. We can't take that as a major indictment of like, oh, well, Corey Anderson doesn't have it. He's not going to ever be a top 5 guy. It's just not a meaningful there's no way to take a meaningful measuring stick just off wins and losses in that division, even if they're not competitive, because guys are going to get thrown in way over their head as quickly as they get any kind of profile for the UFC.
Yep.
So
what else happened that weekend? Remember that whole thing where I talked about how I didn't know Will Brooks was the dude to hold down Marcin Held?
Yeah.
Yeah, what the fuck do I know, huh?
I know. Well, that's the thing. Will Brooks has this lovely ability to talk the kind of game that makes you think he's going to lose. He undercuts his own credibility in a rather miraculous kind of way.
It's impressive. It is its own little subset of skill that he has. But yeah, if I only saw snippets of this fight, but it looked very much like what happens to submission grapplers now. And when I say submission grapplers, I mean the archetype of the guy who's looking for the submission every moment is on the mat, no matter what position he's in. If you don't find it, you tend to lose, and you tend to get beat up along the way. And even when you find one, if a dude feels like he's got it in the bank, he tries to tough it out. Because from what I heard, Brooks's one of Brooks's knees might still be ginger a week later.
Yeah, it is. That's why we say the higher up you get, the harder it is to be a grappler. Like, to have that be your primary skill set. And you really have to give an immense amount of credit to those fighters that manage it at the top. Guys like Shields and Maya and who's the other? Oh, Jacare.
Mm-hmm.
Like, those dudes are rare. Most guys, when they reach the elite, there are very few grapplers among the elite.
Well,
It's
I would say there are very few grapplers who still play a grappling game at
yeah,
like an
exactly.
utterly grappling focused game. And Jacare doesn't even really play a totally grappling focused game anymore.
Well, for a long time, he worked really hard to sharpen his boxing,
Mm-hmm.
and then more recently, what we've seen now is that with his boxing having become more trustworthy, he's focused a lot more on just his power wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
And so you see this combination now of Jacare will weave into the pocket with a few short, sharp punches, hit a double leg, and then you're sucked back right straight into his grappling game where you're not going to survive.
Yeah, yeah. He's. I mean, Jacare is legitimately an all-time great at jiu-jitsu and choking people, and it shows whenever he's on the mat.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean that was definitely the other big thing that happened in the previous week was Will Brooks kind of really putting the brakes on Marcin Held. But let's take a look at some of the other stuff going on this week. Couple other fights to note, couple other guys to look at. Over in Legacy FC, Leonardo Lete is not exactly a prospect. He's 37, but his career is pretty young, and he is an elite grappler who's making the jump over to an MMA career, it seems like.
It seems like it. I don't know how committed to MMA is because I know he still competes for Copa Podio, which is like one of the more successful professional jiu-jitsu leagues going on. It recently got picked up. I mean, it's been picked up on TV in Brazil, and it's going to be streamed in the U.S. On actually it's going to be on Flow Grappling, and so he kind of has a foot in both worlds right now. So I kind of feel like when I watch him, he's a really good athlete for his age. He's pushing
Yeah.
40 and he's in excellent shape. Um, his striking, I would term him as a thoroughly average MMA boxer with basically no kicks in his game, defensively or offensively. He's got good finishes to his wrestling. If he gets a hold of your leg, he actually has pretty solid finishes. Just his entries off striking just aren't very good right now. And if he gets you on the mat, it's I mean, he's the 1999 and 2000 black belt world champion, really heavy, holds you down, looks for your back, and then looks for a choke. And he's pretty good at it. Hard to get up from under this guy. So he's an interesting fighter to watch, kind of this older guy who is both like at once an old school jiu-jitsu guy, but also still playing with the new school jiu-jitsu grapplers. Also just kind of trying to do both in like a very like early 2000s kind of way.
Yeah, it's somebody, it's an interesting thing to watch, especially just in terms of. It's always interesting to see guys, especially guys who have a lot of experience in other martial arts, jump into MMA and see what kind of career they carve out there. Looking at the game in general and how it develops and what's successful and what isn't, a lot of times fighters like that can tell you a hell of a lot about how the sport operates. It's like
Mhm.
seeing Joe Schilling get absolutely cold cocked by Hisaki Kato. Like that tells you a lot about how the striking metagame operates in MMA.
Yeah.
And so watching a guy like let the jump over into MMA, like you're gonna see you know how to it's not maybe not always at this level, but generally it's going to still show you like how does how does wrestling and grappling function in MMA, how much of somebody who has a seriously elite game in it, in a very particular singular style, are they still able to just absolutely dominate, or where do they end up having problems.
Hmm.
So even if you're not watching somebody who's going to develop into a next like future champ, uh, a lot of times watching those kind of fighters is very informative. The other thing we want to jump over to just a little bit is this Bama 23 card, Night of Champions, that has 5 title fights on it and a few fighters that are of some interest to watch. Most particularly, Ronnie Sada versus Shajidul Hake.
I think it's Hawk. I think
Or
is what
Hawk.
I saw.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Shajidul Hawk. Who somehow does not have a Hawk-based nickname. I don't
I know,
know how
right?
that happened.
I think on the broadcast I was reading, I think they called him Shock Hawk.
Yeah,
I think, but
Shock Hawk.
yeah. Um,
Okay,
yeah.
whatever.
Whatever. It's well, let's start off with the fact that Ronnie is a pretty top shelf flyweight prospect. This is his first title defense of the Bama flyweight title, correct?
Yep.
Excellent athlete. I think he's still pretty young, so he needs to grow into his frame a little bit. He's small for flyweight,
Yeah.
which not much you can do about that. We don't have a men's atom weight division.
But he's really young, so
Yeah, he's really young. I expect him to put on a little bit of muscle. He's really aggressive on the feet, in the clinch, and in wrestling. And his aggression in those phases kind of covers up some defensive holes at times.
Yeah.
On the mat, he's a really fun grappler, very technical, good bottom game, excellent transitions to the back pretty much everywhere, and then a pretty strong finishing game from there. So I kind of see him as being a guy to watch in the flyweight division as being, and he's German, correct?
Yep.
Yeah, I think he could be one of the first real players in the flyweight division hailing from Europe.
That would be interesting to see. Yeah. Hopefully he can put on some muscle and make the jump over to the UFC at some point, because they can always use more flyweights, and it would be good to see a couple of European guys come over who are really in a position to make a run, not on the Neil Seary end of things or Brad Pickett.
Yeah.
But and to his credit too, Shockhawk there, he looks like a really fun talent. He looks like a very I mean, almost prototypical kind, like I would say prototypical kind of UK talent, classic UK talent even, except that he has a very unusual striking style. Like he's very much like it. Almost he almost has like a sort of Dominic Cruz striking style. Lots of stance switching, lots of darting in and out of range, but at the end, very linear entries and very singular, somewhat predictable strikes. Like lots of movement and then very predictable outcome. But fun for that. Like he's the kind of guy who will like leap in, and then he throws a quick jab and a big overhand right and a low kick off of it. But he has a really active kicking game, so you're always guessing about whether he's jumping in to throw the kick or throw the overhand. And just a very fun, like, active striker.
Yeah, Hawk's game surprised me at how well rounded it is. He's like above average in almost every skill set. And is an above average athlete, and I think could be a fun fighter. I think that's going to be a really excellent fight for Bama. So
yeah, that's a fun one. We also took very briefly go over there's Lazar's Craig is a fight between two light heavyweight prospects. There aren't a lot of light heavyweight prospects in the world. I don't know that either of these guys is necessarily like bound for greater glory, but they both have good records. Lazar strikes me as the kind of guy who's like a pretty good athlete who is not a very natural fighter.
yeah,
Like, he's just clunky.
He's kind of clunky, and he strikes on the feet, but without really any like big technique. And he really just wants to grind you down on the mat. He's a big grinder. He's big. He's a big, strong light heavyweight who wants to put some weight on you. While Craig Paul is a little bit more of a fluid athlete and is like a flowy submission grappler sort of guy. So I think we get some. We can either get Marcin holding Craig down for 3 rounds, or we're going to get some fun grappling exchanges on the mat.
Yeah, because Craig doesn't have the striking to take advantage of Lazar's being clunky and hittable. He, it really will come back down to whether or not Lazar's is just physical enough to outmuscle Craig on the ground. If he outmuscles him, then you'll get a really boring grind. If he
Yeah.
can't, then it should be a pretty fun grappling battle. Otherwise, Ed Arthur is the bantamweight, defending his bantamweight title, and he looks like a fun, scrappy kind of, you know, I wouldn't necessarily say quadruple A fighter, but he has the feeling of a guy who is very tough and active and aggressive, and those are his principal attributes. You know?
Yeah, I looked at Ed Arthur during the scouting of the bantamweight scouting report, and he wasn't really a guy that stood out to me as a top talent. He's a good athlete, and I think on the feet, we're talking about rigid strikers. I think Ed Arthur would definitely qualify as a rigid striker on the feet. Once he gets on side of you, he's got some pretty good wrestling. He's very insistent about getting inside, and then on the mat, very aggressive submission grappler. I expect him to get a lot of wins. I expect him to submit a lot of like the regional submission guys. So I kind of see him potentially as being that triple or that quadruple A sort of guy, or maybe that guy who just never quite breaks through, but is fun on the regional scene.
Yeah, I mean, I could also see like guys like that if he's tough enough, they can go into the UFC and be like action filler. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
that creates a good action filler level fighter for the UFC. Somebody who's there for 3 or 4 years, gets 7 or 8 fights, and then is gone. Um, but we'll see. It is a game that could also just be the kind of thing where he every time he gets a shot at the big show could be a big step back.
Mm-hmm.
So still, a few interesting fighters to watch out for there, especially that flyweight fight. And generally a good week of prospects. I mean, honestly, there's a lot I'm looking forward to in terms of development on this UFC 193 card. It doesn't have the best fights in terms of entertainment, but if you're looking
Mm-hmm.
for fighters that are going to develop and show something down the road, I think there's a lot to offer.
Yep. I
And on
think
that
I'm
note,
looking forward to it. And to be perfectly honest, we had a brief talk about it with the buy rate. I think this is going to be a pretty big show for the
oh
UFC.
yeah,
This is. I have people turning me down to come over and watch the pay per view because they've already committed to watch the pay per view somewhere else, and I'm up to like 12 people coming over. That's more than people. That's more people interested in watching this than when I asked around for UFC 100 back in the day.
yeah, it's I think MMA fans still do not want to admit and have no clue just how popular Ronda Rousey is,
Mm-hmm.
and are still in like we still see this like, oh well, Beth did so much heavy lifting in that last fight and that's really underrated, and Holm isn't doing that, so this one won't sell, and it's like I really don't think that's what's going on there,
Mm-hmm.
guys. I really don't think so.
Yeah,
I don't know if it'll break 1 million, but I think it'll be right in that neighborhood.
it'll be close.
Yeah. On that note, time to close the show. You can find me on Twitter at TheZaneSimon. You can find Tom on Twitter at TP_Grant. You can find us both on Bloody Elbow and Tom over at Flow Grappling as well. And stay tuned, find this show over on MMANation.com. That's DOTCOM, all spelled out. Give us a like on YouTube. And remember to stay tuned for all our other videos. We'll have 6th round, Knuckle Up, more Care Don't Care, Vivisection, all our shows. So thanks for tuning in, everyone. We'll see you next week.